With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Chav Vav. We left off on Daf Chav Vav, Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the top of the Amud. We're going to continue to learn about the obligations of a person who is occupied with the performance of a mitzvah. We are learning the sugya of ha'osek b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah. The Gemara is going to quote the second clause in the Mishnah Daf Chafei regarding the choylin, the sick, and their attendants, that they are both exempt from sitting in the sukkah. And the big chiddush that we will learn today is the rule and the many different applications of teishvu ke'ein toduru, which means literally that a person has to live in a sukkah as they live in the same way that they dwell in their homes. And we will see again phenomenal different mamish applications of the rule of teishvu ke'ein toduru. We're going to go back and learn about the final clause on the Mishnah Daf Chafei, that oichlin achilas aray chutz l'sukkah, that a person halachically is allowed to eat a casual meal or a light meal. We will define what that means, and that will lead us into the whole sugya of the isser of sleeping while wearing tefillin. Because when the Mishnah allows a person halachically to eat achilas aray chutz l'sukkah, so one second. So the reason why we are allowed to, we're medayik, achilas aray chutz l'sukkah is okay. From that we extrapolate, but sleeping, even aray, is not okay. And that's going to lead us into the sugya of the isur of sleeping while wearing tefillin. The Gemara is going to teach us that asur la'adam lishon b'yoyim yoisen mishin asus. Wow. And we'll see that as Rashi will learn that that's the isur of bittul Torah. And finally, the Mishnah Daf Chavav Amud Beis will teach us that even though we just mentioned that halachically a person is allowed to eat an achilas aray chutz l'sukkah, but if a person wants, they are allowed to be machmir not to eat anything outside the sukkah, which is indeed the minig Chabad. And there's a novelty to that, because there are certain areas in a halacha where we say, mechsa kiyuhara, you're like boasting, it's haughtiness. We don't apply this mechsa kiyuhara, and yes, a person is going to be complimented for being machmer and not consuming anything outside the sukkah, and chevra, much more. Let us start again on Daf Chavav Amud Aleph, the last word of the second line from the top of the Amud Tanya, and we will now continue to learn other Tanoim, not like the one we just learned on top of the Amud, which Lishitas Rashi does not subscribe to the rule ha'osek b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah, but we will continue to learn other Tanoim, as we learned in our Mishnah, that we do subscribe to the rule that when you are occupied in the mitzvah, how it's explained by the Rishonim, then you are then exempt from another mitzvah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'ar kol yom v'dvarim. Says the Gemara Tanya, Amar Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya, koisvei sfarim tefillin umezuzos, people that are writing sfarim means sifrei Torah, and or tefillin and or mezuzos, we call that stam. So hein both describes the tagoreim and the merchants. This is important. We're not speaking about people who are merchants that buy from the soifrim and sell retail in order to make a parnasa, but we're speaking about merchants whose primary concern is to provide the public with their religious needs, and therefore they are also considered oiskin b'mitzvah. And not only if you have a one middle person, one tagor, right, he buys it from the soifrim, but even if it's v'tagore tagreim, even if it goes through another merchant, again, as long as the primary purpose for people who are selling stam are doing it for the mitzvah of providing the public the needs of mitzvahs, and also v'chol ha'oskim b'malach hashamayim, anyone who's involved with heaven's work. And the Gemara interrupts and clarifies, what does the Braisa mean to add la'asuyei moichrei tcheles, people that are selling tcheles, that are selling tzitzis, back to the Braisa, because of the rule of oiskin b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah, petured mikrishma, they are exempt of shema. They are exempt from Tefilla, from prayer, and they are exempt from wearing tefillin, and we call mitzvahs u'amuros b'Torah. And why is that? L'kayim divrei Rabbi Yossi Haglili, shehoya Rabbi Yossi Haglili oimer ha'oisik b'mitzvah potem en ha'mitzvah. And just to add, b'kitzur, I mean, these sugyas are huge. We're flying through them. That there is a novelty in this, but I said that we did not have prior. Up until now, when we learned chafei, and ha'oisik b'mitzvah potem en ha'mitzvah, we were only referring to people that they themselves were occupied in a mitzvah. And here when we're speaking about tagarim, merchants, they are themselves, you can argue, are not doing a mitzvah. They are busy facilitating others doing mitzvahs. And even in such a scenario, we apply the rule of ha'oisik b'mitzvah, patur min ha'mitzvah. Weiter. Tanach Rabbanim, we learned in a Brais that hoil cheiderachim, if a person is on a trip, and as it becomes clear, not a mitzvah trip, a person is on a business trip. Now, a business trip, chol hamoed, as we'll learn, there are certain work that one is allowed to be busied with. We're speaking obviously about such a work. For example, odavar ha'aved, that means if there's an opportunity, there's a business that if you will not work on chol hamoed, you will sustain a loss, and you're going on a trip. So ba yoim, so during the day, if your trip is during the day, then peturin min hasukah bayom, then during the day you are exempt from a sukkah. Now it's not a mitzvah trip, so why are you exempt? Chavre, let's look inside Rashi, 4 lines from the top of the Amid. Let's start to unpackage the first application of this teishvu ke'ein toduru. Now the Torah uses the words in Emor. Basukah is teishvu. Say Chazal that Basukah Teishvu means Ke'ein Yeshivas Beisai. That the type of dwelling in the sukkah has to be similar to the way we dwell in our homes. Meaning that Shekem Shekol Hashana Einoi Nimna Mileches Baderech B'Schoira. Just like during the year, if a person has a business need, they will not refrain from traveling because, oh my God, I can't sleep in my bed tonight. No, you go work. You leave your home to get parnasa. Kach kol yemay sachag. Similarly, during Yom Tov, she'einu Yom Tov. Obviously, if it's not a Yom Tov day where you're not allowed to travel, you're not allowed to do business. Lo yitzrichu hakosuv limnoya. You're not commanded to refrain because you don't have your dwelling. In other words, once you look at your sukkah, that your sukkah isn't just a place where you eat in. Your sukkah becomes your home. You move into your sukkah. Well, people leave their homes to travel for business. People are allowed to leave their sukkah to travel for business. Now, of course, if there's a sukkah available, then go sit in a sukkah. But you're not obligated to make that effort to sit in a sukkah. But that's only during the day when you are traveling a day. But v'chayavin b'laylo. But at night, not that you're coming back home. At night, you are obligated to search for a sukkah. Let's go to the concept. If a person is working during the day and their work is outside their homes, which was the norm until now COVID, you left your home, stay there. So at night you would come back. So similarly, if you are able to find a sukkah at night when you're not directly occupied in business, you're obligated to search for one. And there are actually many achrayim that add, there's a machlokes about it, but they add, and if you didn't find, then it's fine. What should you do? But you're mechuyev to look for one, unlike during the day, you don't even have to search for a sukkah. And the same thing is, if your trip is you're traveling at night, during the trip itself, then you're puturim in sukkah balayla. But you're chayiv bayoim. And if a person is hoil cheiderachim bayoim ubalayla, you're making a 24-hour stint work, so then puturim in sukkah, bein bayoim, bein balayla. And this is again, the chiddush here is that we are saying that teishvu ke'ein toduru, you don't have to dwell in the sukkah more than the way you dwell in your home. In contrast, if a person is going on a mitzvah trip, then not only are you exempt while you are actually traveling on the road, but you will also be exempt when you are resting in between, like we learned Rashi in the Mishnah. Peturim bein bayoim ubein balayla. And here Rashi, 10 lines from the top of the Amr, explains, Afal pisha ein holchen ela bayoim. But you are exempt from dwelling, from eating, sleeping, etc. at night. Mishum de tiridim v'doyagim b'machsheves hamitzvah ubetikuneha. Going back to the concept that we learned yesterday, that ha'oisik b'mitzvah doesn't only mean begashmius, it also means a mental preoccupation, that while you are on a mitzvah trip, you are preoccupied with your mission, not only when you are actually traveling, And that preoccupation is that which exempts you from the mitzvah of dwelling in a sukkah. And back inside the Gemara. And a couple of stories about that. Ki hadar Rab Chizda and Abba Barafuna. That kihavu aili b'shapsa derigla, when they would travel for the Shabbos cholamoyet sukkahs. Obviously, regel means old regalim, but we're speaking about sukkahs. And they would travel to the lebei reish galusa, to the household of the reish galusa. And as we'll see, there were two mitzvahs involved in this trip. As we already learned not that long ago, that the mitzvah of being mekabel pnei rabbi beregel was applied also to the reish galusa. Together with that, they were going to listen to a shiur. There was a special shiur that was given Shabbos Cholamoid. So their trip was a mitzvah trip, going to learn Torah, going to be Mekabel Pnei Rabbi. So have a ganu, they would sleep where? Arkasa de Surah. They would sleep on the bank of Surah. In other words, they would not sleep in a sukkah. And why is that? Either resting, they're not actually traveling. So if you're resting, rest in a sukkah, because they said, Anan, Shluchim, Mitzvah, Anan, and because of our rules of Ha'oisik Mitzvah, Patim and Mitzvah, therefore, Upeturin. Weiter. Tana Rabbanan. Shoymrehu Ir Bayom. People, security guards. However, we're not minimizing the greatness of security guards, but just for clarity, a security guard is not doing a mitzvah. Traveling to hear Torah, not only learning Torah, traveling to learn Torah is a mitzvah. A security guard is not doing a mitzvah. So therefore, during the time of them standing guard, then if we... Wait, just give me a second. Then, but again, chayavim balayla, mamish, like a person who's going on a business trip. Similarly, if they're standing guard at night, then peturim and asukah balayla v'chayavim bayoyim. And again, it's the same rule of that teishvu ke'ein taduru. If I have to go have a business meeting, I will leave my house. So when you're doing work, you don't have to be in a sukkah. If a person has a 24-hour slot, so then fine, put him in a sukkah. Furthermore, if a person is guarding orchards, if a person is a guard for a garden, they are paturin bein bayom or bein balayla. Now, unlike a shomer hu'ir, that I assume is constantly walking around, when you are a shomer in a garden, you are more or less staying put in one location. So the Gemara wants to understand, vili avdei Sukah Hassan v'leisvu. Why don't you put a sukkah down over there? Maybe even when the person goes to work, and if their work would be somewhere outside the home, but in a stationary place, they would also put themselves in some sort of shelter. And here we're having a phenomenal concept of Abaya. Abaya says the reason why we don't obligate them to build a sukkah out there in the garden or in the courtyard, in the orchard, because teishvu ke'ein taduru. Wow! And Rashi writes like this: that when a person resides in his home, a person doesn't just have four walls and a roof. A person has with him certain comfort items. You have a couch, you have a sofa, you have a certain amount of furniture, you have a certain amount of kalim. And we cannot demand of you to schlep all of these accessories out there in the field. And therefore, you're exempt from the sukkah. Wow. Teishvu ke'ein taduru. Rava Amar, Rava writes like this, that there's a concept, guys, don't misconstrue this as we're blaming the victim. But when, for example, someone's home was broken into, so we have to also be cognitive that if there was a vulnerable spot, if there was a breach in the wall, well, the breach in the wall is inviting the ganav. That's the expression of Chazal. Pirza koida leganav. And if you're going to tell the security guard, that they have to build a hut, they have to build a sukkah, then there's going to be a large amount of that orchard, of that garden, that will be outside of the visual of the guard. If the guard is standing outside, then he can see 360 all around him. If you are in a sukkah, you're going to have a very limited amount of vision, which means this will invite ganavim, which means he won't be able to do his job properly. So we're not saying that the job, again, is a mitzvah. in the context of ha'isik v'mitzvah. Going for a parnasa, like we said, security guard, it's pre-mitzvahs. They're necessities which allow a yid to be well in order to keep the mitzvahs. But it doesn't matter. But just like when a person is on a business trip, if they cannot perform their job, if they're going to be demanded to stay in the sukkah, they are exempt from staying in a sukkah while they're working. A guard, if he's going to be in a booth where he's supposed to be outdoors, is not doing his job properly. Pirza koira laganav. And my benayu between Abaye and Rava, Ike benayu, if his job is to chamintar karya the peit, if there's only one pile of produce that he has to watch, and all of that pile can be placed in front of the sukkah. That means you can sit in the sukkah and you can properly guard it. So if the only reason is because if you're going to have to be in a sukkah, then you won't be able to fulfill your mission properly, your job of being a guardian, here you can fulfill it properly. But if we're saying that if your job takes you out there in the fields, and we cannot be machayiv you to build a sukkah in which you don't have a certain basic amount of accessories in it, and we're not going to tell a person, go schlep your furniture with you. So that is the exemption. So even though the person will be able to fulfill his job properly, he will be halachically exempt from being in the sukkah. Now again, as we'll see on Chavav Amid Beis, we're not suggesting that you should not go beyond the letter of the law. Gesundheit hate. There's no yuhara. But by the letter of the law, that will be your exemption. Not because of a mitzvah, but because of teishu ke'ein toduru. So Rabbi Yaakov was asking before about traveling to a Rebbe. For sure, traveling to a Rebbe, if going to the Reish Galusa is called a mitzvah, which it is, when you're going to the tzaddik, and chayiv adam lahagbul pnei rabbi beregel. Sure, it's a mitzvah. And by the letter of the law, that will be an exemption. And not only an exemption, like we said, during the trip itself, but by the letter of the law, bein bayoim, ubein balayla. Let's go weiter. Cholim umisham shehem. So the Mishnah said, the second din in the Mishnah Daf Chafei, that the sick and those who are attending the sick are exempt from a sukkah. Says the Gemara Tanach Rabbanim, we learned in a Braisa, that cholos amru, that the ill person here is not necessarily a cholos yesh boy sakana, and a chola, right, whose life is in danger, all the mitzvahs are waived for that chola. So there's no doubt that if going into this, so he's not obligated in the mitzvahs. Elo, the chiddush of the Mishnah is afilu chaylo she'ein b'sakana, even if this person's life is not in danger. For example, afilu chash be'einav, he has an eye ache. Afilu chash be'roisha, he has a headache. He's also exempt from the sukkah. The question is, why is he exempt from the sukkah? Guys, it's not because if he would go to the sukkah, it would aggravate that illness. It has nothing to do with that. Teishvu ke'ein toduru. When a person is dwelling during the year in his home, a person who's ill would make sure that he would be in a place where he has more comfort and not in a place where there's less comfort. That's the way when people are sick, they need a certain amount of pampering. And therefore, the heightened appreciation of and effort for comfort that a choila does for himself is something that he does for himself on sukkahs. And moving out to the sukkah diminishes that level of comfort, so he's exempt from going to the sukkah. I want you to know, I was in the city of Kesari, and I had an eye ache. The great Rabbi Yossi told me that Lishain Ani, not only that I was allowed to sleep outside the sukkah, but as we have in the Mishnah, Umeshamshai, those who were attending me to live, it means to sleep, to eat outside the sukkah. Weiter, another story, Rav Shara le Rav Acha Bardala, permitted to Rav Acha from Bardala lemigna bechilta, to sleep in a canopy in a sukkah. Guys, we had the sugya in the first Perek. Obviously, we're speaking about a canopy that does have a tefach wide roof, and without the heter of the chayla, one would not be allowed. We're following those shitos. That's an oil inside the sukkah. But why was he given the permission to sleep in this canopy? This is so real to us. Mishum baki, because of mosquitoes. And that was the mosquito net. And that was the structure that gave this. So just like during the year, teishvu ke'ein toduru, a person in the home would sleep in a location where they won't get bitten by mosquitoes. So if the way you'll prevent yourself from getting bitten up is by sleeping in a canopy, sleep in the canopy. In that case, the canopy removed him from the halachic sukkah, so be it. Teishvu ke'ein taduru. Next, Rava Shari Leila Rav Acha bar Ada. Rava permitted to Rav Acha bar Ada lemigna to sleep bar mi metalalta outside the shaded area, which means outside the sukkah. Why? Another reason. Mishum sircha the gargishta, because there was a foul odor, there was a bad smell from the gargishta. Rashi writes from some sort of white flooring. There was white sand. Now we did learn on the first chapter that you're not supposed to make schach very smelly. Obviously, the odor that was coming from the floor was not a objectively offensive odor. Most people were fine with it. This Rav Acha subjectively was very sensitive to scent. So again, the chiddush is that you are allowed to be subjective. If you feel inconvenience, if for you it's uncomfortable, there's one question. What would happen during the year in your home? If in your bedroom the floor would have that odor, would you change bedrooms? If the answer is yes, even though most people wouldn't care about it, they wouldn't even be aware of it, you will apply the same thing for the sukkah. Teishvu ke'ein taduru. Rava l'tamei, here it's the mitztair. Rava l'tamei, the Amar Rava, mitztair, if a person experiences distress, then you are exempt from the sukkah. And by the way, mitztair, patam in a sukkah, is connected to Teishvu ke'ein taduru, so writes Tosfos explicitly. All right, reflecting Gemara for Hanan Tanan. We learned in our Mishnah choylin u'mishamsheim. Not only do these cholim she'ein by sakana, and those who attend them are exempt from the sukkah. Shouldn't we infer from the Mishnah only choyla is exempt, but if a person is only in distress but they're not ill, which is a notch down, they are not exempt? Says the Gemara, you are on the right track, but you have to tweak your inference. Amri, they answered, now choyla, if someone is ill, not only may he be outside the sukkah, but even umishamshav, even those who are attending him are allowed to be outside the sukkah. And why is that? Not because we're not saying because it's a mitzvah, because just like a meshamish of a choyli, that's like his job. He's attending the choyli. What would they do during the year? They would go to the choyli. They would leave their homes to be with the choyla. So they do the same thing with the sukkah. Mitztair, if a person is not ill, he's in distress, people don't inconvenience themselves to be with someone who's, so to say, only in distress. So who pater? Also pater. And let's follow with this mahalach that he's pater because of Teishvu ke'ein taduru. But umishamshav loy, because during the year, someone who likes to attend to another won't do so unless they are at least choyla, even she'ein by sakana. Stam for a mitztayer, you don't have people that have people attending them because they're mitztayer.
All right. It seems like, according to this,
yes,
that even if it's like you're very uncomfortable, it's very hot outside.
Yes.
Then you wouldn't have to sit in the sukkah.
Yeah, so I want to say like this, that to speak about the whole topic, that the Rabbeim did not sleep in the sukkah. When we see clearly that the Iker dwelling is more, the Mishnah uses sleeping more than eating, but the Rebbe explaining their approach makes it clear it's not because of mitztair. And even though that by the letter of the law, yes, it could be used mitztair, and guys, we come from Russia, and there it was about freezing, but Hasidim always go beyond the letter of the law, and especially when it comes to tzaddikim. So that's a whole different issue of why were they looking to only go by the letter of the law. But there's no debate, Danny, that if a person is in Sa'ar, if there isn't a Teishvu ke'ein taduru, then by the letter of the law, you are exempt from a sukkah. And just to point out that, sure, go ahead, Rabbi Yaakov.
According to one opinion, at least, I think if you don't be there, there has to be enough space to have a table in the sukkah, right?
What Rabbi Yaakov I think is going to mention is that how can you tell people, we paskin that the minimum size sukkah is 7 by 7, how can you b'chlal sleep in a 7 by 7? This is one, right? That was
my idea. So I think that popping out a box for not dish, so that popping out muffin for a bed also, that's what I'm asking.
Yes, so that's, okay, Yaakov, I hear you. This is a big discussion here amongst the Rishonim about this. that if we're emphasizing Teishvu Ke'ein Toduru, that explains actually Shitas Rebbe that says a sukkah has to have 4 amas. That's the big question. The Yaakov, you good? How can you say that a sukkah is good enough if it's 7 by 7 tefachim? You kidding? You go try to sleep in 7 tefachim.
No, so it fell apart from the bed. We only remember the of a table. I don't remember. Maybe I missed it.
No, you didn't mix it up. The question is, if a person doesn't have a sukkah in which they are comfortable to sleep, but they do have a sukkah in which they're comfortable to eat, they're obligated to eat. Okay, weiter.
Exactly that. Something like
Very good. Okay, weiter. Now, the final clause on the Mishnah is that if you have a meal that's called a casual meal, or it's called a light meal, or a temporary meal, or let's use the word snack, we'll have to just see defined halachically, is snack about quantity, is snack about quality. But if it's going to be defined halachically as a arai, then again, by the letter of the law, you can consume it outside the sukkah. So the first question is, V'kam achilas arai? Now, Chevra, I want you to know that we are not, the answers of the Gemara is even about bread, as it's clear. Amar Rabbi Yosef, Tarte oitlas beye, the volume of 2 or 3 eggs of bread. Even that, by the letter of the law, can one consume outside the sukkah. Wow. Now, why is it 2 or 3? Guys, we keep on repeating that when it comes to achilas pras, which is the amount, pras means a half of a bread, which is the amount of food that people consume halachically during a meal. So we have this big machlekes whether a loaf of bread is comprised of the volume of 8 eggs or of 6 eggs, which would make the pras either 4 eggs or 3 eggs. That's the tartoi tlas. That if pras means 3 eggs, then what will define a meal to be called a snack and not a meal? Quantity. It can be qualitatively bread, which is the ikar of a meal according to halacha. But if you're eating less than the 3 eggs, which will be 2, if the loaf of bread is 8 eggs, so a half a loaf of bread is 4 eggs, so what's less than that 3? That's the 2 or the 3. As long as you're eating less than the minimum amount of pras, that's called arai. Amar le Abaye, disagreeing with his great teacher Rav Yosef, Chazimn and Sagi, and there are many times that Sagi leile inshi behachi, that 2 or 3 eggs volume of bread will fill you up. That will be your meal, and that will make it into a sudas keva. And Abaye obviously won't accept that there is a objective definition. He says no, that it has to be subjective. And if someone doesn't have that big appetite and the taka feels satisfied, and we're speaking about bread, how can you call that arai? Elo amar Abaye. Again, he still will go to quantity. Even bread, Abaye is even speaking about bread, but it's kedetoyim bar beirav ayalakalam, that when the yeshiva bacher has to go to a shiur, the class is beginning, and nebach, you're starving, so you chop a bite. How much is a bite? Guys, we learned this in Yuma. What's the maximum amount of food that you can swallow at one time? The volume of 1 egg, 1 chicken's egg, beitza, beya. So not 2 or 3 volume of beye, but one. If it's not more than 1, that's called arai. A lot more coming. We learned in a brayse that indeed, as we learned in our Mishnah. But now let's expand upon that. But again, sleeping, there is a deep sleep or a permanent sleep, and then you have what we'll call in English a nap, or a shinas arai. That may not be done outside the sukkah, obviously, when you're obligated to sleep. And that's taka why the Mishnah only spoke mitamol about eating, when all the other Mishnayos, and whenever we want to use one living activity to focus on the chiyuv of the sukkah, we always speak about sleeping. Why are we speaking about eating? Because taka sleeping, you may never sleep any amount outside the sukkah. And why? My tama, let's start. Amar Avashi. Really, you could. But there's a gzeira. What's the gzeira? Gzeira shema yiradem. You might fall into a deep sleep. No, it's when you're eating arai, there's a lesser of a concern that you're already starting to eat. You're going to decide to eat a permanent meal. By sleeping, you're sleeping. Once you take a nap, you might sleep what will halachically be considered a permanent shlaf. Amalei Abaye ve'elo hadatanya. Hold on. We learned in the Braisa that Yoshin Adam Shinas Aray b'Tefillin, a person is allowed to sleep a Shinas Aray, you're allowed to nap in Tefillin. People then used to wear Tefillin during the entire day. The issue of sleeping in Tefillin primarily is gufnaki, which means that a person will vent air while they are sleeping, and halachically we will say that that only happens when you get into a deep sleep. However, we'll define a nap, which will be discussed over here. During a nap, a person, when he's mindful, I'm wearing my tefillin, there's no venting air, it's not going to happen. So you can sleep shinas aray, avaloi shinas keva. And now we have a kasha on Avashi. If there is a fear, gzeira shema yiradem, so how can we allow a person even to have a shinas aray in tefillin, leichu shema yiradem? Gewaldig. So Omar, Rabbi Yosef, Bereit, Rabbi Loi, that beraisa that allows you to sleep a shinas aray in tefillin is only b'moiser shinas ilachedim. You entrust your sleep to someone else, which means that you have a chaver that's not sleeping and you tell him, do me a favor, if I hit a certain amount of time, wake me up. You be my alarm clock. And if not for that, then you may not sleep even a shinas aray in tefillin. Hold on, the last narrow line. It's interesting. When it comes to sleep, guys, sleep is contagious. I can tell you, yawns are contagious. I mean, the opposite is also true. When one guy's filled with enthusiasm, it's contagious. If I'm your arev, guarantors, the irony of a guarantor, and this is the Talmudic expression, you're inviting someone to guarantee that you won't fall asleep deeply. Your guarantor himself also needs a guarantor. The guarantor needs a guarantor, even though this guy is actually planning to nap. And the guy that you're asking to make sure I don't fall asleep deeply, as far as you know, he's not planning to nap. But that's the nature of things. We're assuming you're not napping in a public area, you're napping in a quiet area, it's just you and your friend. And why would he not doze off and nap? So that's not good enough. If we are afraid that if someone falls asleep, he might go into a deep sleep, then getting one other person in most settings won't be good enough of a security that you won't actually have shinas kava. So Elo Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. I'll tell you why. When does the Brais allow a Yid with tefillin to sleep shinas aray? If the position of his sleep is such that he will not go into a deep sleep. And where is that? Where he puts his head in between his knees. And that's a position, Aaron is enjoying this, where you're not going to go into a long sleep. Now guys, we all went to yeshiva, and I'm telling you guys, my chavedim, your chavedim, can figure out how to sleep like that. So they have to sleep in another position. You can only, today you can tell my yeshiva guy, only sleep when you're standing. Say, then you're not going to go into a deep sleep. Rava has a whole different approach. It's not that we are concerned that you're going to go into a deep sleep. No. If a person decides, I'm only going to sleep, whatever halacha says is a nap, then that person, whether he's going to get an alarm clock or get a chaver, or just many people when they decide how much they'll sleep, I'm waking up tomorrow morning, 5:30, you wake up. The reason why you're not allowed to sleep outside the sukkah, even a nap, is because it's called a power nap. As far as venting air is concerned, when you are only aray sleep, you're going to have a gufnaki. But if a person is going to sleep even only, let's say, the minute nap, guys, there are times that a little nap will invigorate you, mamish like sleeping the whole night. You have to know how to take a nap. And therefore, there's no such a halachic concept of aray. When it comes to eating, if you eat less than a certain amount, that's not called you didn't eat a meal, you ate a snack. When it comes to sleeping, sometimes that's his gavaldik liner. Ein keva l'shina. Ein keva l'shina means because even what you will call a nap can be just as beneficial and will afford you as much restfulness as a longer shluff. Many people know that. Sometimes they go to sleep during the day. If they sleep for an hour, they're finished. Knocks them out. If they sleep for a few minutes, you have a doctor here, this must be a medical thing. Sometimes it's amazing. You have to know how to take it. And that nap is like heaven. And actually, the Gemara points out that there's 3 different braises that appear to contradict each other, but they don't, as well we will reconcile them. Tanach, the braise number 1, it says, Yoshin Adam with tefillin, a person is allowed to sleep in tefillin, shinas aray, avaloi shinas keva. Tanya Idach Braisa number 2 says, no, that you are allowed to sleep. Wow. Bein keva bein arai. We'll have to explain it. Well, how? There is a guf naki issue. Tanya Idach, we learned in the third Braisa, the opposite l'chumra, loy keva v'loy arai. And it's not that they are different tanoim that are disagreeing with each other. Second to last line in the bottom of the Amid, loy kasha. They all have the same opinion. They're only speaking about different scenarios. And we're going in the following order. Ha, Braisa number 3, the most chamur, loy keva v'loy arai, is the naket hu biyadei. This person doesn't want to sleep in his tefillin. So you know what he does? He removes his tefillin, but he holds it in his hand. There are no tables there, there are no chairs there. He wants to be respectful to the tefillin. Chaver, if I'm holding something in my hand, even if I only doze off, what is in my hand might fall down. So that's why you're not allowed to sleep, because you might drop your tefillin. Braisa number 1, we're going out of order, which says, what we learned above, not shinas keva, yes, allowed shinas arai, that's the manchei bereishei. That is when you are actually wearing your tefillin on your head. And the reason why you may not sleep in tefillin is because of guf naki, and halacha says that if you will only sleep whatever a nap is, we'll see soon in the next line, then we're not afraid of that. And Braisa number 2, which allows you keva, aray, and allows everything, is the paresudra ilavid, that you removed your tefillin. You're not holding it in your hand. Again, we're speaking about a person that's out there. There's no table, there's no chair. All they did is they took their kerchief and they covered their tefillin, which is that they are affording a minimum amount of kaveh to the tefillin. And lest you think that unless your tefillin are stored in a respectable place, then you may not leave it that way. It's not true. As long as it's covered, that's respectful enough, and you can sleep right over there. Okay. And now the big question is, v'kama shinas arai. By achila, we had a machlokes, Rabbi Yosef and Abaya, right? 2 or 3 egg volume, even of bread, versus Abaya that he's speaking about 1 egg volume. It's a quantitative. So how do we define quantitatively? Where does it go from a nap into a sleep? It's like this: Tanei Rami Bar Yecheskel Kedei Hiluch Meya Amma. That the amount of time that it takes an average person to walk 100 amma, which is anywhere between 150 feet or 200 feet, that's a very small amount of time. Only if you sleep for that little time, that's probably around a minute, right? 200 feet. Anything more than that is already called keva. Tanya nami hachi, hayoshin b'tfilin. Now we're going me'inyan le'inyan. And what happens if a person has a seminal emission while tefillin is on them? So I want you to know that when we subscribed to Tefillas Ezra made a takana that was never fully accepted, and later it was overturned that a yid may not articulate words of prayer nor of Torah before going to the mikvah. Then it's a much bigger issue wearing tefillin when a person had a seminal emission. But if we don't subscribe to Tefillas Ezra, then just to know, then the problem with a keri and tefillin is while there is substance of the semen on the person's body, then they may not wear their tefillin. And when they remove it, when they wipe it off, certainly when they wash it off and washing then their hands, then the person is allowed to put on tefillin. So says the Braisa that v'roya keri, if a person sees a keri, before wiping off the zera, the semen, remove your tefillin, but we don't want for you even to touch the box itself. So what do? Oiches b'ritzua, grab the tefillin only by your straps, daf chavav amid beis, and ve'ena oiches b'tzitza, and don't hold the box itself. Divrei Rebbe Yaakov, which is a big novelty because the rule generally is that one should never allow the box of the tefillin to dangle by grabbing onto the ritzuas. When we put on, especially the head tefillin, figure out how to always also hold the box itself. It's not respectful to have the tefillin dangling. This is the exception, because this person has zera on his body. So therefore, not only must you remove the tefillin, don't use your hands touching the tefillin themselves. The ritzuas are taka tashmishe kedusha, but the box itself has a higher level of kedusha. Now, v'chachamim oimrim yoshein adam b'tefillin shinas aray. A person is allowed to sleep shinas aray, avoloi shinas keva, but not a shinas keva. Now, what does Rabbi Yaakov hold about that? It sounds like the Chachamim are arguing with Rabbi Yaakov, and it's clear. The Chachamim agree with Rabbi Yaakov that if there is de facto semen on a person's body while they are wearing tefillin, you must remove it, and also remove it in a way where you don't touch the box itself. However, how does a person end up with zera on one's body? So what Chachamim understood by the scenario is that Rabbi Yaakov allows a person to sleep shinas keva. We're not going to suspect that a person is going to have a voluntary seminal emission. We're speaking about an involuntary seminal emission. When would that happen? If a person is deeply in sleep. So when the whole case only came about, so understood the Chachamim b'shitas Rabbi Yaakov, is because he allows a person even to sleep shinas keva. So that's why they have to emphasize that's not allowed. And now,
in the brisa that we learned before, where we said it's mukha for shinas aray and shinas keva.
That's only when you remove it.
Right, when you remove it. So then what's the chiddush? You're not wearing tefillin, right?
No. That's the whole chiddush. That Rabbi Yaakov allows you to sleep in your tefillin. Shinas keva.
Forget Rabbi Yaakov for a second. I'm talking about what we said before.
So you're going backwards. The chiddush there is, Danny, is that you don't have to guard your tefillin in a respectable place. When I'm going out, when I'm traveling in the field, and during the days that we wore tefillin the whole time, and I remove my tefillin, and all I have is my tefillin bag, and I'm going to have to lay my tefillin bag on the ground, and you can argue it's not respectful, it's fine. If you removed your tefillin and you covered it, you're good.
You can take a long sleep. You don't have to worry about it.
It's not only about the safety of, it's also about the cover that you have to afford. When people nowadays, we wouldn't say that. We would not put our tefillin bag on the ground. But you have to understand that people then wore the tefillin the whole day. It was different. You have to have a certain amount of leniency, of flexibility, making it possible. Weiter. And here the Brisa says, all of the Brisa here was brought just to back up the one shita that we quoted, the Brisa that was stood in the yeshiva of Rami Bar Yecheskel, that's Kedei Hiluch Mea Amma, the time that it takes a person to walk 100 amas. Mamash nothing, 150, 200 feet. Amar Rav, says Rav, Me'ingen le'ingen ba'oise ingen, asur la'adam lishan ba'yoim, a person is not allowed to sleep during the day, yoiser mishina sus, more than a sleep of a horse. Now 1 second, what's the issue of sleeping during the day? So here Rashi writes, Bittul Torah. And I want you to know that it's really a case by case. I know people to whom the Rebbe told that they should take a nap during the day. So you have to know yourself, and there isn't a one size fits all. I'm speaking now halacha l'maisa. But if a person doesn't need to rest during the day, then they taka shouldn't. Okay. And if you sleep, don't do more than shinas asus. And again, maybe physically, medically, sleeping a little bit, if you know how to do it and when to do it, can be more invigorating than sleeping for a longer amount of time. So if you're going to sleep during the day, don't have the long sleep. You won't sleep good at night later. The Kamashinas Asus, here are the famous. Let's go back. Shitin Nishmi, 60 respirations. Chevra, in halacha, there's so much about the 60 respirations. If you remember, we had this also in the beginning of brachas about David HaMelech. We'll go back to that in a moment. So you have min hakotza lakotza. The extreme opinions will be that it's around 3 1/3 minutes. That is when a human being will take 60 respirations. And if you're going to sleep during the day, don't sleep more than that. The Chidah, who many of us are most familiar with, will say that Shitin Nishmi or Shinas Asus is a 30-minute nap, not more than that. And just Al Pi Kabbalah, that when we also add that after a certain point, because of the higher level of Tumah that we still have in Golus, unlike in the times of Chazal, that when they woke up in their beds, they said Alekai Neshama. Moida'ani is not a tefillah that they had in the times of Gemara. Now we don't say Alekai Neshama because we're not going to evoke God's name before what we call washing Negelvasser. How much sleep do you need to sleep to have to wash Negelvasser? The Shitin Nishmi, and we follow the Chidah. That means if you sleep during the day, 30 minutes or more, wash Negelvasser. And if you sleep less, then you're not obligated to do so. And just to know, there's another Shita, all in halacha. The Tiferet Tzvi writes that 60 breaths means 3 hours. If you sleep, and then it's pashut that Rav is saying, don't sleep in the day for more than 3 hours. Okay, Amar Abaya, says Abaya, like practically, Abaya was a Talmud by the great Rabbah, right, by Rabbi Bar Nachmani, who also raised him. So Abaya said like this, that Shenasei Damar, all of these great people, they took a nap during the day. And here, since there is a limit of how much you can sleep, so he said that my master would sleep like Rav, who was his teacher. And Rav would sleep the way Rabbeinu HaKadosh would sleep. Rebbe was Rav's teacher, Rashi writes. And Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who was many generations after David, but he was a descendant of David HaMelech, so his family had a tradition of how much did King David sleep. David slept just as long, but not longer than the sleep of a horse. And just to remind everyone that we're making a jump, because we learned clearly in Brachas, Daf Gimel Amud Beis, that King David never slept more than Kishinas Asus, not even during the day. David HaMelech habituated his body of sleeping various times for the 30 minutes. Here we're not putting any limits of how much you can sleep during the night, but we are just referring to David HaMelech with this concept of he slept Kisus and not more. And Udesusya, here are the words again, is Shitin Nishmei. If it's 3 hours, it would be the easiest to understand that David HaMelech probably slept in every 24 hours. Maybe he slept a 3 hour here and a 3 hour there. If it's 30 minutes, at least it's within the realm of wow. But if it's just 3 minutes and a bit, that David HaMelech never slept more than 3 minutes and a bit, that's like completely beyond. All right. Says the Gemara, Abaya, Habanayim, when Abaya, if he would sleep during the day, again, to be careful not to oversleep during the day, how long would he sleep? He would sleep the amount of time that it would take someone to walk from Pum Bedisa to the city of Kuvay. And again, the big discussion, and how distant was it? Many opine that the distance was less than a mil. And if Hiluch mil, right, we all know the different opinions, whether it's 18 minutes, whether it's 24 minutes. So it's all within, let's go to the Chidashita. If he would sleep during the day, it would not be for 30, it would be less than that. So l'chayri, you would say, okay, Pseider, that's something that's okay. Yet, his teacher demanded more of him. Kari alei Rabbi Yosef read about him, to him. He reprimanded him by quoting the verse in Mishlei, that Ad Masai Otzel Tishkav, how long will you lazy one recline? Masai Toka Mishnosecha, when will you finally arise from your sleep? And again, just saying that you have to push it, no, B'poyel Mamish, what works for you, and for many people, taking a little dose during the day is very, very invigorating. And for many people, sleeping too much during the day won't do any benefit for you. It's just going to confuse your whole seder. You're going to you might even be very rested, but then at night you won't fall asleep and you get into that cycle, and which is an unhealthy cycle. Okay. Taner Rabbanan. Hanichnas lishan bayoim. You're coming home, you're in yeshiva, you're coming home to take up a little nap. So Ratza Chaylitz, Ratza Maniach. You don't have to remove your tefillin, because we are paskening like the various Tanoim that we learned above, that if a person is only sleeping Shinas Aray, and by day don't sleep more than Aray, you don't have to remove your tefillin. If you want, you can remove it. If you want, you can leave it on. But if a person is going to sleep at night, even if you intend to go back to learn, but it's already dark, you must remove your tefillin, you may not leave it on. These are the words of Rabbi Nassan, as we learned Tanach, like Ravashi said, even if you plan, I'm only going to sleep between 9 and 10 p.m. and then I'm going to go up and get up and learn. Once it's night, you might, the Shinas Aray might turn into a Shinas Keva, and the issue with tefillin is gufnaki. Rabbi Yossi Oimer, ha yiladim, yiladim here means kinderlach, meaning young men. Even if they're only going to sleep during the day, they always must remove the tefillin. They may never sleep even aray with their tefillin. Why? What does that mean? Says Rashi that the initial understanding of this Rabbi Yossi is that they might have an involuntary seminal emission while they're sleeping because they're young. So says the Gemara, Lema kasava Rabbi Yossi balkeri asur laniach tefillin. If you will subscribe that a Balkedi may not wear tefillin, as we just spoke out a bit above, connected to those and to the times where people were bound by Takanas Ezra, then you can stretch it by saying that even though this person is, God forbid, is not having a voluntary seminal emission, but if you take him, right, may not have tefillin until you went to the mikvah, so then we can say don't even sleep ashinas aray. If wearing tefillin as a balkedi is not problematic only if the actual zera is on the body, that you have to remove the semen. But if you're not bound by tefillas Ezra, then it doesn't make sense to tell a person who's only going to sleep for a nap, what are the chances that there'll be a seminal emission? And even if there is a seminal emission, it's not the end of the world, just remove the zera. So it's too big of a chumrah, so it would only make sense if he would subscribe to tefillas Ezra, and that will be something that we're trying to avoid. And that's particularly true because we're speaking about the Tana Rabbi Yosi, and as we know that Rabbi Yosi nimukai imoi, we normally paskin like Rabbi Yosi. And we really don't want to go ahead and say that someone on the level of Rabbi Yosi, whom we paskin like, subscribes to tefillas Ezra, which would mean that if a person had a seminal emission prior to going to the mikveh, they bechlal may not wear tefillin. Well, which is not the halacha. So Amar Abaye, let me explain to you what Rabbi Yosi means. We're speaking about young men, but young men whose wives are home. We're not afraid that if a person is going to lay down, he might have a seminal emission. We are afraid that if this young person is going to go lay down during the day, but in his home, when his wife is there, he might forget that he's wearing tefillin. Guys, when you wear tefillin the whole day, it's not as easy to be mindful of that fact, and he might actually voluntarily have a relation with his wife. That's something else. And therefore, you're young, your wife is there, remove your tefillin, even if your plan is just to take a little nap. Let's go weiter. Tanach Rabbanan, we learned in the Brisa that if that happened, if a person is wearing the tefillin, and they forgot they were wearing the tefillin, and a person had a marital relation with his wife, v'shimesh mitasi b'tefillin, so if you actually did the deed there, unlike we learned on top of this Amid, remove, if a person had a seminal emission, then remove the tefillin by the straps, just don't touch the ktsitsa. Here it's worse, because during the act of tashmish amita, one's hands probably touched a part of the body that you're obligated to wash it off, and therefore you're not even allowed to grab the tzua. Here we say first wash your hands, and then remove the tefillin, then the person has to just wipe off the semen from the body. We don't subscribe to tefillas Ezra by the letter of the law, and then when the body is clean, then the person physically cleaned off, then the person can put the tefillin back on. We have 2 more minutes. I just want to learn the next Mishnah because it's really a hemshech. What did we learn in Chaf Hei? We learned in Chaf Hei that achilas aray may be eaten outside the sukkah. And in many areas in halacha, other than for Pesach, there hamachmer harezeh meshubach, we're not always into chumras. But when it comes to people being machmer and only eating and drinking any minimal amount in the sukkah, that's another area where we tolerate that, we actually commend that. We certainly don't look at it in a derogatory way. And that's the Maisa. Maisa v'vi'u Rabbi Yechman Zakai. They had a cooked food, not bread. And only to taste, litoim, which means it was the quantity, it was a little, the quality, it wasn't even bread. And also there was another story where they brought to Rabban Gamliel only shtei koisavos, only 2 dates, and a delish almayim and a bucket of water. And even though you're not mechuyev to consume it in the sukkah, nevertheless va'amru, both of them said, ha'alum l'sukkah, bring him up to the sukkah. Bring him up. We just learned that when it comes to the chas and adani, bringing up means because they used to build their sukkahs on the roof. In other words, I'm going to go beyond the letter of the law and I'm going to have that snack or that bucket of water in a sukkah. However, not everyone was machmer. In the amount that's less than the kibetza, which is even la'abaya, if you remember, right? It's also achilas aray. Nevertheless, and he was not machmer, not loy b'mapa. He took that oichel, that bread, with a mappa. He did not touch it directly. And let me just read the words in the Mishnah. And he ate it outside the sukkah, And v'loy beirach achrav, and he did not make an after bracha. Huge. We're going to conclude here, but we're going to read the Rashi. Says Rashi, not lu b'mapa, the reason why he took it through holding a napkin or holding a towel, v'loy not al yadav, ela karach b'mapa b'yadav. If you have water available, you're not going to rely on, I'm not going to wash until Shadayim, but I'm going to hold my sandwich through a mappa. We don't go there. We're very careful when to use that. Here, Rabbi Yaakov held, as we will learn, that when you eat less than the kibetza, you are not obligated netilas yadayim b'chlal. He only held the food through a mappa for hygienic reasons. Mishum nekiyus. Rashi, Mishum, because the Kosovar, because Rabbi Tzadok holds that pachus mikabetza loiboy netilas yadayim. And connected to that, consistent with that, you don't need a tilas yadayim because it's not a kabetz, and therefore loiboy Sukah. Another din, what's the minimum amount of bread you must eat to be mechuyev in birchas hamazon, even only on a rabbinic level? Midoiraisa ve'achalta v'savater. Remember, midrabanan, Rab Meir says kezayis, Rabbi Yehuda says kebetzah. So Rabbi Tzadok subscribes to Rabbi Yehuda, and if you don't even eat a kebetzah, even if you ate a kezayis, you're not obligated to do birchas hamazon. V'loi boy birchas hamazon la'achrov, because Rab Tzadok expounds like Rabbi Yehuda, v'achalta v'savater v'irachta achila sheyesh boy seviyah v'hainu kebetzah. And finally, Rashi is medayik. Rab Tzadok Taka did not make a bracha afterwards, but he made a bracha prior. Why? Why, guys? Birchas Hanehenin is not Birchas HaMitzvahs. Birchas Hanehenin is a matir. If I don't make Birchas Hanehenin, I'm stealing from God. Lashem ha'aretz u'maloya. And therefore, before you eat food, and no matter how little, you have to make a bracha. Avalofanav b'cholduhu by bracha. Sharei nehenev asur lehenis min olam hazeh b'lei bracha. It's a bit late. God willing, to be continued tomorrow.